and I'm obsessed with, listening to people's stories. So yeah, that's my theory. It's a Yowie that live up in the mountains behind my dad's house. The thing about Cairns is there's a lot of sightings up here, and there's Facebook groups and people share their experiences on that. Cairns isn't a big place, so people talk, and if you talk to any of the local Indigenous people, the Aboriginals, they will always have stories about the hairy men. So it's very common here. I think that when Cairns was colonised, it was built in between the ocean, like where the Great Barrier Reef is, and the tablelands. So the tablelands are like a region higher above sea level. You got to go up the mountain to get there. And as we built in Cairns, we pushed the Yowies up into the forest between us and the tablelands because there are so many sightings up there and stories. Yes, that's what I reckon. And yeah, it'd be great to hear other people's stories if anyone else is from the Cairns region or Queensland. Love the podcast and have a good day, everyone. See ya.
Thanks, Kim. I love a good Yowie story. Now, for those not familiar, the Yowie is essentially Australia's Bigfoot, or I guess Sasquatch, a tall bipedal human-like ape that is said to roam the bush in the outback. Now, there are Yowie hunters just like there are Bigfoot hunters here in the States, and they too collect evidence. Witness reports, cast footprints, hair samples, and even audio evidence. The following was recorded from the bush in a recording device left for several months by Yowie hunter Jason Heel. Now imagine yourself holed up in a small camper at the base of a mountain, and you hear that in the middle of the night. And perhaps that is similar to what Kim's friend heard that night. But I couldn't help but notice that Kim listed a known critter that also makes similar deep grunting sounds. She mentioned the existence of feral hogs in the area. Well, as my dad vouched for in the opener, I have inside knowledge for just about everything. And I do for this as well. I actually grew up raising hogs. My family raised and slaughtered several over the years, and I spent a majority of my preteen and early teen years in and around the neighbor's much larger hog operation. The point being here that they're intelligent animals that can also make a strange array of sounds. Now those unsettling sounds come to us from a boar, a wild boar, and they come courtesy of Ian Fairley on YouTube. So could that have been what Kim's friend heard that evening? A roaming boar sniffing around the yard. That's certainly an easier pill to swallow, both as a skeptic and someone that's probably hoping there's not some 8-foot giant creature in their yard. But I will say it is worth noting that the stories persist, the sightings continue, and the legends continue to grow. So something is feeding that growth. And before we move on this evening, Kim mentioned something that caught my ear. The discussion of Aboriginal peoples of Australia having stories about the Yowie. While that may be true, there certainly aren't many examples of it in video form. I did some serious digging and came up nearly empty. Now perhaps it's a cultural thing. Perhaps the stories just simply don't exist. Or perhaps, and most likely, no one has taken the time to capture these stories. But despite a lack of Aboriginal Yowie stories in digital media, I did find one tale that I got a kick out of.
Back in 1986, I was driving near Kempsey in New South Wales in Australia, a remote country town which is surrounded by hills covered in very thick forest. An Aboriginal man was hitchhiking back to his campsite. I gave him a lift. He was very grateful for the lift, as he had been waiting on the side of the road for over an hour. He told me how his uncle had gone fishing at a creek in a spot that took an hour to walk. It was very isolated. It was a hot day. He soon caught 2 big fish. Then he went to sleep in the long grass on the bank of the creek. He was suddenly woken up by a noise. He stood up, and a Yowie was crouched down by the creek and drinking water only a few meters from him. He startled the Yowie, who had also jumped up and stared in surprise. His uncle punched the Yowie in the stomach, then he ran off as fast as he could, leaving the fish and fishing bag behind. I asked if his uncle described the Yowie, and he replied no. The man also said his uncle claimed the Yowie had a soft stomach, not hard. I presume the uncle had his experience in the 1950s.
Now that one was courtesy of Bigfoot Case Files on YouTube, and was practically the only Yowie story I could find from the Aboriginal perspective. And quite the story it was. And thanks again, Kim, for sharing your incredible entry. Now I have some fun and exciting news. Thursday, December 23rd, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, we're going live. And that's right, we're bringing back the holiday special. And this year, I think we have all the kinks worked out. So again, that's 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific on the 23rd of December. Links will be provided ahead of time. And per usual, we are featuring listeners like you. So if you have a spooky, true holiday season story, hit me up with a summary at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com, and maybe you will be featured. Then we have guests and prizes and all sorts of fun things, so be sure to stop by. For more information on that, just listen to upcoming episodes, or be sure to follow us on social media. So then, our next entry might just teach us all a little lesson. Here's Rob from the UK.
Hello Derek, this is Rob again from the UK. I just wanted to tell you about a bizarre experience that happened to me. This would have been in May of 1991. I was living in Cambridge at the time, and I was travelling back to Cambridge after visiting my mum. I'd visited my mum's house, which was about 20 miles west of Cambridge. Just shortly after leaving my mother's house, I was driving back to Cambridge heading east. The sky was very overcast, so there was a lot of light being reflected off the clouds and things like that, which will lead me to what I'm going to tell you about in a moment. But as I was driving along, I saw something flash past my window on the driver's side. So I glanced up at the sky, and after a few seconds I saw another light flashing in the sky, then another and another. And what gradually became apparent as I was looking out the window was I was looking at an enormous pinwheel of light that was rotating. It was a huge circle, and it was following my car. It was the most bizarre sight. The lights were concentric. They were kind of going into the middle, then coming out again, going into the middle, coming out again, kind of pulsating, changing colour. So I continued along the road for a good few miles. I would probably say 6 miles. And I got to a roundabout called the Caxton Gibbet, which is an appropriately spooky place. It's a location where they allegedly used to hang highwaymen and other criminals way back in the day, and an actual replica of the gibbet, of the actual gibbet. There's a replica of the gibbet is still there. I mean, there's a McDonald's there now and a petrol station. It's quite a big area now, but it's still quite an odd sort of spooky kind of place. Anyway, as I got to this roundabout, there was a truck driver who pulled up and 2 or 3 other motorists had pulled up, and we were all staring at this light that was circling over our cars, over our vehicles. And the truck driver, I'll never forget this, he turned to me and he said, "That's got to be a UFO." And we were looking at this thing, and the lights were going in and out and pulsating and changing colour, and it was absolutely enormous. It was about the size of a football field. So I got back in my car, started to head back towards Cambridge, and this thing started following my car again. So I'm driving along, I'm looking at this thing, and then gradually I became aware that lasers were coming out of the bottom of this object, heading towards the ground. And now, by this time I was starting to get really freaked out. I thought, this is just really weird. Now what's going on? Continued down the road a few more miles, and then I noticed that the lasers were getting brighter. They were gaining in intensity, and they seemed to be focused in on a particular area of the ground. And then it suddenly dawned on me what I was looking at. In Cambridge in May, it's the graduation party for all of the Cambridge University students. All of the universities have what's called a May Ball. And for these May Balls, they have fun fairs, they have bands, they have all kinds of things. And it turns out what I was looking at was a laser light show that was projecting from the ground up onto the low cloud. The cloud ceiling must have been fairly low, perhaps a few 100 feet at best. But this thing was visible from miles away. So I'd essentially been driving towards this laser show, but it had looked like a UFO that was following my car. The optical illusion that this thing created was just amazing. And the thing that puts me in mind of this was one of your guests mentioned looking at a pinwheel, mentioned seeing a pinwheel UFO, and that reminded me of my experience back in the summer of 1991. It even made it onto the news the next day because people apparently had been phoning in saying they'd seen this object in the sky that turned out to be strictly terrestrial in its origin. Anyway, I love the podcast. Thank you for all of your hard work, all your editing and all your research that you do. We really all enjoy them, and I look forward eagerly to every episode. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it made you chuckle, and I'll perhaps speak to you again sometime. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rob. And for all the U.S. listeners out there, here we call a gibbet a gallows, if that helps paint the scene. Now, we've recently featured a very similar sounding video on an episode of Paraweekly, my bi-weekly paranormal news show over on YouTube. I was certain then that the UFO was too some sort of promotional spotlight. Some of those things are quite intricate in design. And I don't think it's any secret that I enjoy calls like this. Sometimes it's just fun to get a final conclusion to some of these mysteries. And we all know that they can't all be paranormal. So thanks again, Rob, for sharing that little experience. Now, if you have a true paranormal story you would like to share on the show, simply call the hotline at 1-888-6089. That's 1-888-608-6444. Now, our next terrifying tale was sent to us from an anonymous caller from the Codfish State.
Hi, Derek. Well, I wanted to call in and share my story. So I live in a one-family house, although it's kind of like two because the basement has been made into an apartment, and my mother lives down there. So over the weekend, well, actually on Monday, my mom came up and talked to us and said, "Did you guys have company over last night?" And we said, "No, my husband and I." And we asked why. She said, I think this was Friday night. She said she woke up at like 1 in the morning or so. She sleeps on the couch in front of the TV, and her computer is in that same room. So she said she woke up around 1 in the morning and saw somebody sitting at her computer, like a kid, like a teenager, and another one kind of standing in the doorway next to the stairs that actually lead from the basement into the main part of the house where my husband and I stay. And she woke up and saw them there, and she looked at them. They noticed her, and then they just kind of got up and just kind of slowly walked back up the stairs into the main part of the house, which is where my husband and I are. So we thought that was odd because we didn't have any guests over. We don't know any teenage kids. There's no signs of anybody breaking into the house. She said nothing was missing. We also thought it was odd that of all the computers that there are in the house, I have a computer, my husband has a computer, that they would go into the basement specifically to use her computer. So we said, no, there are no guests, no signs of break-in. And she says, well, I know I'm not crazy. And I know she's not either, but I just thought that was interesting. So thank you, Derek. I'm a big fan. I've probably been listening to your show for about a year. I think you do a great job. I think the people who call in are extremely interesting. I love your show. I'm a Patreon. But yeah, keep up the good work.
Thanks, caller. There's a first. A spirit using electronics. A computer, no less. Now, it's details like that makes me wonder if this isn't more of a time slip situation rather than a ghostly one. Was our caller's mother witness to the past, or did she get a glimpse into the future? Regardless, it's a wild tale, and we appreciate our mystery caller sharing it. Now for this next entry, what do you say we stay in the Bay State? Check out this one from Patrick in the state of Massachusetts.
Hey Derek, my name's Patrick. I'm calling from Massachusetts. I'm from a small town outside of Boston called Arlington. It's about 7 miles outside of Boston. So it's a small duplex that we grew up in. And there were 6 of us, including my 4 siblings. We had a dog, and there was only 3 bedrooms. So I used to sleep on a mattress in my parents' room on the floor. My brothers shared a room, and my sister had her own room. So this was back when I was probably 8 years old, 7 years old, and I would definitely be awake. Like, I know for a fact I was not sleeping. And I would roll over on the mattress, and I'd look over at my mom's bed, because the way I was positioned was right next to their bed. I'd look over and I'd see my mom sitting on the end of the bed with her legs crossed, and she was just smiling at me, but with like a sinister smile. It wasn't like a normal smile. It was like this deep, huge grin, ear to ear, smiling, the biggest she could smile. And the scariest part was that I'd look over and I'd see my mom sleeping. I'd see my mom with her sleep mask on, sleeping, and there would be her sitting at the end of the bed. 2 versions of my mom, one of them with this creepy smile. So what I'd do is I'd roll over on the other side, I'd throw the blanket over my head, and I would just close my eyes and pray, and, you know, eventually fall asleep, never turning my head over and looking again until the sun came up. So this would happen, you know, relatively frequently when I was a kid. You know, my parents didn't really believe me, imagination, they'd think, or whatever, dreams. But I remember another time, so it would only be my mom. I remember another time I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and I left their room. And to get to the bathroom, I had to pass my brother's room, and both my brothers were sleeping in there. It was the middle of the night. We were kids. And the door was open to their bedroom, as it always was. And I saw my brother sitting on the end of the bed, legs crossed, smiling at me. And then I saw him laying in bed. It was 2 versions of him. The real him sleeping, I could see his face sleeping, and then I'd see this, like, for lack of a better term, doppelganger sitting on the end of the bed, smiling at me with this, like, sinister, evil-looking smile. So I booked it back to my parents' room, got underneath the blanket, threw it over my head, you know, laid there until I fell asleep eventually. So it stopped happening, and, you know, I searched everywhere to see if anybody else had an experience like this. I could not find anything, anywhere, with anybody having a similar experience. That's the reason I'm calling. I was hoping that maybe somebody listening to this might have a similar experience, or, you know what the hell was going on. So thanks, Derek. You know, I appreciate everything you do. Love the podcast. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Patrick. That's for all those doppelganger fans out there. Now you think the traditional experience is creepy. Poor Patrick was left seeing double. And what's with the grin each doppelganger had? It's very Indrid Cold-esque of them. Now, it's great stuff, Patrick. So maybe a few listeners out there have had a similar experience. Perhaps in time, we can shed some light on this mystery. Thanks again for taking the time to share. Now, folks, the holidays are fast approaching, and I heard that Monsters Among Us gear is on many wish lists this year. So head on over to monstersamongus.com/shop to pick up something sinister for that amongster in your life. We have all sorts of items, but might I suggest a perfect stocking stuffer. Pick up one of several poster designs, and remember, proceeds from each poster sold goes to the Navajo Water Project, a nonprofit aiming to bring clean water to America's most in need, beginning with our friends at the Navajo Nation. Oh, and did I mention that I personally autograph each and every one of them? Or just treat yourself with a membership to Monsters Among Us Beyond over on Patreon. $4 a month, 50 plus episodes, patreon.com/Monsters Among Us podcast. And now, time for another dip into the ghostly realm. This is Sarah Jane from Parts Unknown, and a slight trigger warning for the mention of suicide in the following call.
Heyo, my name is Sarah Jane. That's my first name, don't worry about it. And I just wanted to call in. My friend Eric encouraged me to. He's the one who actually introduced me to your podcast. But wanted to call not about my own story, but about my grandmother's. So it was about 20 years ago. in the autumn, and my grandmother went over to her friend's house. I don't remember where exactly it was. I thought it was in Manhattan, but I may be wrong. But she went over there with her friend, Joan, and my grandmother slept on the couch, and Joan slept in the bed with her. And she was sleeping, and she heard running footsteps charge towards her, like someone was running right at her, and it woke her up because it was running from across the room. It woke her up, and she felt a hot gust of air jump over her, and there was a window behind the couch. She felt it jump over her and, like, vanish through the window. She didn't make much of it. She just kind of thought, you know, whatever, maybe I'm having a bad nightmare or something. And the next day, when she woke up, she told the woman who, it wasn't her friend, it was her friend's friend that had brought her to that house. So she told the woman and her friend that she had felt this, like, after she heard the running footsteps, she had felt the hot gust of air go right over her and vanish in the window. And the woman started crying, and she had said that it was like right around the time of her son's birthday, and he had died. I think it was like a year or 2 or 3 years ago. He had like lit himself on fire and had made a running charge and jumped out the window and had, I can't remember, it was a couple stories up. So I think he fell to his death while he was on fire, but he might have just ended up burning to death after he fell out the window anyway. So, yeah, that's about it. And hope it helps, and happy holidays. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. Don't worry. I won't. I gotta say, that story is worthy of the silver screen. It's exciting, terrifying, and there's development, and the entire story is wrapped up well as any of these could be. It's something of a classic ghost story. We thank you, Sarah Jane, for sharing your grandmother's experience. Now, did you guys check out Paraweekly last week? Well, it'd be a lot cooler if you did. Those that did will notice I do a segment that features videos from viewers like you. So if you have something spooky on video you would like us to take a look at, you can send that over to contactparaweekly@gmail.com. And be sure to tune in. New episodes every other Friday. Now then, this next one comes to us from a unique perspective. Please join me in welcoming Michael from California to the program.
Yeah, what's going on? My name is Michael. I'm from the Bay Area, California. I'm here at work listening to your podcast. And, I served 6 years in prison, but when I was in county, one day I was looking out my window, which was normal. Me and my cellie were talking, looking out our window, talking about the past and the families and stuff like that. And I'm sitting down looking at this star, and just as soon as I seen the star, I'm looking at this thing, and out of nowhere, this thing moves in the blink of an eye, just out the way. I got so scared, I jumped off the top rack, hit the door, it was shaking. My hair's on the back of my neck stand up, and my cellie is freaking out, telling me what the hell is going on. It was amazing because it was a star in place. You could see it was huge, and just in the blink of an eye, it was gone. It wasn't gone, it moved so fast. And just how scared I was, my cellie, we started looking out the window every night. Matter of fact, for 3 nights, I didn't sleep by my window. I slept on the opposite side. Yeah, you guys can make whatever you guys want from it, but that was my story. That's the craziest thing I saw in the sky. So, yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Now, I certainly don't blame you at all for freaking out in this situation. You're trapped, no escape. If something were to happen on an extraterrestrial level on the outside, you're locked away, a sitting duck. So I get it. I would probably be a little freaked as well. But as far as the object is concerned, I'm not aware of anything that can move the way Michael described this object moving. It almost sounds otherworldly. Thanks again, Michael, for taking the time to share that entry. Now you'd think at this point we'd be wrapping it up, but I have a lot more we need to get through. Stories from a darkened Texas road. Stories like Sarah's.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I live in Central Texas. This experience happened to me about a year ago. So one night, I'm driving home from work. I work in a restaurant and we close at 9:30 at night. I live about 35 minutes from work. I live out in the country, so I'm about a half-hour drive from basically anywhere in town. So I'm driving home and I'm starting to get close to the road I'm going to turn down to head to my house. So to get to my house, you'd be driving down the main road. It's not a highway, but the speed limit is 65. Since you're out in the country and everything is spread out, you want to drive faster, I guess. Anyway, you'd be driving down the main road, and right before you get to my turnoff, you would go over a short bridge, and then the main road would curve around while going up a hill. Then after the curve, you would see the road you could turn off onto on the left, which would be my turnoff. I hope that made some sense. So I'm driving down the main road after work. I'm almost to the small bridge. It's probably around 11 p.m. now, since the restaurant I work at closes at 9:30, and it takes about an hour to clean up after closing, and then about half an hour for me to get home. So around 11 at night, I'm approaching this small bridge. It's a pretty small bridge made out of concrete that goes over a creek. The bridge is probably only a few hundred feet, so you're not driving on it for very long. Anyway, I'm approaching this bridge, and as I'm coming over it, something hits the right side of my car near the back. Right before it hit, like split second right before it hit, I saw a white blur. It startled me pretty good since it made a pretty loud noise when it hit, and it did hit my car, not my car hitting it. It hit the right side of my car near the back. I'm not sure of exactly where it hit on the car because it didn't leave any marks, which is one of the things I thought was kind of strange. So anyway, I'm driving over the bridge and something flies into my car. Like I said, it startled me, so I hit the brakes, but not hard enough to stop the car. Remember, it's 11 at night and I'm just a girl, so I wasn't sure about getting out of the car, especially on a bridge where the speed limit is 65 and I could cause an accident if a car was trying to avoid hitting me. So I hit the brakes enough to slow down a little, but I kept the car moving. My brain is going crazy though with what that could have been. My first thought is alien UFO, since I'm into that kind of stuff, and because birds don't really fly around at 11 p.m., but I also figured there's probably some explanation on what just hit my car. The white blur I saw was probably a bird, even though it was nighttime. So anyways, like I said, I slowed my car down, but I was still moving and approaching the curve in the road I mentioned in the beginning. That's right after the bridge. The whole time I'm still driving, I'm thinking about the thing that hit my car, like was it an animal or what? So I'm still driving around the curve, and I can see my turnoff up ahead, but I'm just too curious. So I use my turnoff to turn my car around, and I head back to the bridge. This whole time, I haven't seen a single other car on the road, so I'm back at the bridge, and I'm still a little bit spooked about getting out of my car and walking around on this bridge. So instead, I slow down to like a crawl, probably not even 10 miles an hour, and very slowly creep my car along the bridge. I've got all my windows rolled down so I can see better, and I'm looking at the sides of the bridge where I'd imagine that the animal would have fallen after whacking into the side of my car. I mean, it hit my car pretty good, so I'd imagined that whatever hit was either dead or seriously injured. But I didn't find anything. I drove up and down the bridge twice, and like I said, it wasn't a big bridge. It was just flat concrete with concrete walls on either side for safety. So it's not like the injured animal could have just crawled like over the side of it after falling, unless it could make it up that concrete wall. But I mean, I did keep driving for a minute after it hit my car, so maybe it had enough time to crawl all the way off the bridge and into the grass. But it was literally like just a minute before I decided to turn around and have a look. So I'm not sure if an injured animal would be able to move that quickly. I really don't know. But anyway, I had driven my car up and down the bridge at a crawl and didn't see a thing. So I decided to head home. Once I got home, I investigated my car. Like I said earlier, there were no markings on the car, not even a scratch, no blood or feathers stuck anywhere, which seemed really strange to me. Because I've seen the aftermath of my dad hitting a pretty good-sized bird with his truck. So I know that stuff gets left behind on the vehicle, but maybe not this time since it hit my car instead of me hitting it with my car. It hit my car. So maybe it didn't leave anything there. I'm not really sure. The next day, I went to hang out with my mom, and I told her the story, and she thinks that it was most likely an owl, which would make sense since it was flying around at night. But if it was, then, I mean, shouldn't the impact have killed it? It hit pretty hard, or at least left it laying injured in the road for me to find when I came back to look. Maybe by luck it wasn't badly injured and it flew off, but I don't know. But I can say that my car was hit by a UFO, since I never figured out what hit it. And that's my story, so I hope you found it interesting, and I'm a really big fan of your podcast, so thanks for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. Now, the odds are really good that your mother is correct. You probably hit an owl. From the sounds of things, maybe a barn owl. And I say that because they are white or light gray, and they live in barns, overhangs, and places like bridges. Now, it's likely the bird was stunned when it struck the side of the truck. It had come to its senses and flew off before Sarah made it back to investigate. Now, I can hear many of you now, but I'm not debunking anything here, just adding a little bit of rational thinking. And just because the creature in question might be an owl, doesn't mean it can't be something supernatural. Now, I received this call from an anonymous source around the same time as Sarah's entry.
Hi, Derek. I'm calling from Texas. According to Mexican lore, there's these big owls with human faces called lechuzas, and they claim to be witches, people that can turn into an owl. Sounds crazy, but that's Mexican lore. And where I'm from, also from Texas, once when I was about 17, I was outside with my mom, and my neighbor from across the street came up and said, "Did you see that?" And we're like, "No, well, what are you talking about?" And he said he was outside in his backyard smoking a cigarette, and from across his fence, he could see a tree, and in the tree, he saw this huge owl that was cackling and laughing and laughing. And he knew that the lady next door to him was an older lady who was really, really sick, and he said that he could hear this owl laughing and laughing, and he claims it was a lechuza who never saw anything, but he said that he started cussing at it because, according to the legend, you're supposed to cuss and curse at it to get it to go away, and he started cussing and cursing, and that it flew away. Don't know, never saw it myself, but that's what he claims. And also, my grandmother had told me a story of a friend who was really sick. She had some sort of rash all over her body, don't know what it was, and she confided in my grandmother that at her window, a really huge owl, she also called it a lechuza, was there laughing at her and mocking her and telling her to scratch at her rashes. Don't know, but that's just a story that I was told. Well, I really love your podcast. Thank you. Bye.
And the funny thing is here, this is not the only lechuza call I've received. And as far as I could tell, each and every one of them originated from the Lone Star State of Texas, the state in which Sarah also had her experience. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Interjecting a little common sense doesn't always have to kill the magic. Hell, in this case, might have amplified it. Thanks again to both the callers in that package. All right, ladies and gentlemen, wait until you get a load of this next story. And I hope you're sitting down. Please welcome our next anonymous caller from New Jersey to the program.
My name is... I want to remain anonymous, and here's my story. I had been newly engaged to a young man, and he took me to a dealership to look for a car. And the family that owned the dealership was extremely wealthy. I noticed that the gentleman, the young gentleman, who's probably like maybe 29, 30, couldn't take his eyes off of me. It made me feel very uncomfortable. Okay, I was engaged. A couple of weeks later, I'm in this club with my girlfriends, didn't drink, and there's 2 levels. I'm on the 2nd level, and I see these 3 men come in dressed in suits. they had like a glow about them, and they seemed to be doting on this one person. And somehow in my mind, I knew that was the man I had seen at the dealership. So I ignored it, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I felt this burning charge go through my back, like from head to toe. And I turned around, and I saw this vision of a giant galaxy out in outer space. Now, this was pre-Hubble, and I had never imagined or seen anything like this, or didn't know anything about outer space, aliens, nothing. And I became so frightened. I just became shuddering. And this man came to me, and he said, "Did you see what happened when I looked at you?" And I said, "What was that?" And he said, "That's the galaxy I come from." And there were two other gentlemen with him, and the one gentleman had started reading my mind and talking about a friend I had who was a professor. He said, "I know your friend, the professor, from this small town in Peru," and he literally named the town. And I'm freaking out. So after that, I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm so scared. I just kept shuddering. I told him, "Yes, I'll call you," even though I was engaged, but I had no intention. And the following weeks, I was so frightened to go back to my apartment because I just felt like somebody was watching me. And I kept saying to myself, "It's in the sky, it's in the sky, it's in the sky." Then after that, there was this cascade of years of bizarre experience. Let's fast forward now. I talked to somebody who is famous, I'll leave him nameless, who was an alien hunter, and he was with the CIA, and I spoke to him about everything and told him everything that happened to me subsequently, like losing a pregnancy, an embryo disappearing in my body after I got married, all these other bizarre goings on. And he confirmed everything I had gone through. And then miraculously, strangely, the email address I had for 10 years was wiped out of the site. And I kept going in, and they said, "No email such as this exists." My correspondence with this alien hunter just completely disappeared off the map. And it was extremely freaky. And I just knew that everything I had gone through was real, and it's frightening beyond any imagination you could have in this world. And totally true. I am sane. I have never been treated for mental illness. I have no medical conditions. This really, really happened. Okay, another part of this alien piece. Later in time, I found out like I was maybe 6 weeks pregnant. And in a couple of nights, I found myself waking up, and it was not a dream. There's a difference between a dream and an experience. This was an experience, and I was in absolute agony. And I opened my eyes, and these people in surgical garb were around me, but they were not people. They had these giant black shiny eyes. They looked Asian. And I was like, "Stop, please. No, you're hurting me." And I looked down, and I saw this black oozing liquid all over my abdomen. And it's funny because years later, I saw the Travis Walton movie, and he described some black oozy stuff. And that was what was all over. And this is before that movie came out. And when I looked at this one creature with the surgical cap, he gave me the most evil look, like he was enjoying hurting me. And it was horrible. So anyway, lo and behold, a couple of days later, I go to get an ultrasound, and they tell me that there's no baby there. There's no evidence of a placenta. There's no nothing. Everything's gone, and I'm not pregnant. It's completely gone. And the doctor was baffled by this. And within a day, I got the worst abdominal infection with 104 fever, where he said, "If you don't get well over the weekend with this antibiotic, go to the emergency room immediately." So whatever went on, I'm telling you, they took my fetus. There was no evidence of it. That was one of many experiences. It sounds bizarre, but I've had so many experiences because I tend to be psychic and see things ahead of time. I'm very intuitive. So one really strange thing is I had gone to Florida to a convention at Disney, and it was at an old sort of a replica of a 1930s hotel, and in the front of the complexes there were these lagoons. The minute we got there that night, I started freaking out. I was like, I want to go home. I want to go home. You've got to get me out of here. This place is horrible. This is Devil's Island. I've got to leave. And the people that ran the convention were like, thinking I was crazy, like all upset, like, what is she talking about? And I was like, no, you don't understand. This place is really bad. This is horrible. Well, the next few days I spent complaining, huddling in the room, saying, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. This is a very bad place. We can't be here, blah, blah, blah. Lo and behold, my son took it upon himself to get us tickets to leave 2 days early from the convention because of all my complaining and apprehension. So we leave. The next week, the little 4-year-old boy that was killed by an alligator, it was right in front of the rooms that we stayed in. I imagine that is what was provoking me to have these horrible feelings that we have to get out of here. This happens to me very often. I'm really psychic. I see things that happen in the future. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and I literally experience it. It is not like people describe. It's not a dream. It's an experience, and I have many, many more that have all come true. Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thanks, caller. Now, allow me to be frank for just a moment. Some calls just sound crazy, bonkers, unbelievable. But what concerns me is when one of those wild stories comes from a normal-sounding, credible witness like our caller. It's spooky because it takes one of the logical explanations away. We then have to assume it's not something like a mental illness causing hallucinations or the like. But if you break it down, what she's saying isn't all that far-fetched. People have experienced that sense of doom that seemed to be a precursor to some sort of danger. People see men in black type figures, which I can only assume was the figures described in her experience. And people even have strange visions, even of the galaxy and the universe. Though admittedly, not all these at the same time. And of course, our caller's claims of stolen fetuses. That's another experience we've heard before. The phenomena even has a poster child of sorts. Alien abductee, Geraldine Orozco.
I became pregnant and I got pregnancy test positive. Next thing you know, I have a miscarriage and there's no fetus. There's nothing.
Geraldine had been pregnant for 8 weeks when she miscarried. A fetus should have been visibly present.
Every time I would become pregnant, I would have a miscarriage or a miscarriage where there wouldn't be the fetus would be missing. When I would see the doctor, and I saw different doctors over the years, they wouldn't know how to explain what had happened to me.
Geraldine claims that aliens actually presented her to her alien human children.
And as I'm looking at these children and I see what they look like, they're not all the way human. This gray, thin skin, a much bigger head, and these giant eyes that are so deep and so profound and so complex. It was just incredible. But what I recognized as I'm meeting the child is that it's my child.
At this moment, Geraldine realized why she could never get pregnant. She believed she wasn't having miscarriages. Her unborn children were being stolen from her womb and mutated with alien DNA.
Now that clip was part of the Discovery Plus show Alien Witness with Ben Hansen. And although the mention of stolen fetuses in regards to alien abduction isn't extremely popular, Geraldine Orozco, Betty Hill, and dozens of others claim it to be true. In fact, they even have a name for it. They call it hybridization.
While thousands of abductions are reported each year, a small percentage claim it's for something known as hybridization. Hybridization involves experiments with reproductive organs, leading many victims to believe they're being used to crossbreed with alien life forms.
That clip from the same program as the previous, and might I add, one of the better UFO-based television shows to come out in recent years. So I guess this all leaves us asking the question, if all this is true, why are they doing this? The possibilities are as endless as they are terrifying, and almost begs the question, do we really want to know? Thanks again, caller, for sharing that nightmare fuel. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Addie Lloyd. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And join us over on social media. We have accounts at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have the ability and a couple spare moments, please leave us a 5-star rating and a nice little review. You have no idea how far that goes to help the show grow. And finally, the terrifying score that you heard this evening was provided by Co.ag Music and Carl Casey and White Bat Audio. Thank you so much for listening. And until next week. Now I know some of you are going to absolutely love tonight's secret entry. For others, it'll probably have an adverse effect. So let's find out in which camp you belong. Welcome to the program, Mystery Caller.
What's going on, Derek? I just started listening to your podcast, man. Big fan. Love getting creeped out by stuff like this. I've actually got a story that took place in Columbia, Alabama. There's a place that was right down the road from it that me and a couple of my buddies and their girlfriends and a girl that I was actually talking to at the time, we went to a place called Columbia Manor. Basically, it was just like this little, I don't even know how to put it, kids' place that little kids go to get scared. We were just bored, so we figured we'd go try it out. Well, it ended up being a huge waste of money, and we ended up actually leaving there and thrill-seeking for something else. So we had gotten told about this place, a little dirt road, that supposedly had a satanic worship spot on it. And we ended up going down this dirt road. It was me, my buddy, like I said, and my other buddy. They actually went home at the time, so it was just me, him, and two girls left. And, of course, me and him wanted to be big ballers and act like we weren't scared of anything. So the place that was in the woods, you actually had to climb a barbed wire fence to get to it. So me and him went first, of course, and they kind of stayed back behind us a little bit. Whenever you climb the first barbed wire fence, we actually had flashlights on, and if we wouldn't have flashlights, we kind of would have been screwed because they had bear traps, everywhere. Like, there was just a row of bear traps surrounding this place, and it was kind of crazy because, we don't have bears in Alabama. So we were stepping over the bear traps, making sure we didn't hit anything, get caught up in any of them, because if we'd have done that, we'd have been goners. It's the middle of Alabama. There was no service where we were at, so we were kind of already freaked out. Me and him were, but we didn't really let it get to our heads. We didn't want to act like we were scared in front of the two girls. So we kept on going, and there was a little building out in the middle of absolute nowhere in this field. And we went inside this building because the door was open. There was no lights, and we shined our flashlights on the walls. And on the walls were actual porn magazines, like naked women magazines, taped all over the place, broken CDs, just where when the light hit it, it would just blind your eyes for how many CDs there were on the wall. It was actually really kind of creepy. And in the middle of it, there was I guess you could call it how a church has an altar spot, right in the middle. There was an altar spot, but on the altar spot there was a skeleton of a dead cat. And you could tell it was a cat, just because I have a cat. I've buried cats before. I've seen their skeletons, and I knew that this was just a regular house cat. Paige, the girl that I was with at the time, she actually stepped on a nail in the floor and screamed. And when she screamed, we heard something at the back of the house just rustling around. So, of course, me and Dylan go check it out. And this is before I could open carry or conceal carry. I didn't have a gun with me. We had no means of protection whatsoever. And we peek out the window of this place, and in the back of the I guess you call it a backyard, it wasn't really a yard. At the back of this place, there were people in black cloaks, and they were abnormally tall. Stupid tall. It was actually kind of crazy how tall they were, and that scared me a lot. And they were dancing around a fire, and one of them had a chicken in their hand. And they were dancing. They weren't like hip-hop dancing, breaking it down. They were weird kind of traditional dancing, just around the fire, holding hands, speaking a really weird language. We could hear them from the house, and that scared us even more. So we got out of there, and we start running, and everybody's running, making sure we don't trip over the bear traps, all kinds of stuff. And as soon as we get back to the car, it was like this beam of light just comes straight up out of the ground. And I'm talking about there's a curve that this place leads into, and I'm talking about we didn't see any type of headlights coming around the curve. I'm talking about this thing just appeared out of absolute nowhere. And as crazy as it's going to sound, there was a yellow, it was a Miata. I remember that clear as day, and it gives me goosebumps to this day. I'm scared to death. I will not go back there. But this Miata, he comes up, coming around this corner, and it was just like he literally just came out of the ground, man. I mean, like, just as fast as the speed of light comes out of the ground. And he almost hits my friend as he's pulling up. So my friend, of course, gets pissed off, runs over to the car, acting like a badass out of hell, and ask him, he's like, man, you need to watch where the F you're going. And this dude lets down his windows, and when I tell you, I'm talking about pure shivers right down my body when I saw his face. His eyes were just like gaping black holes. And he talked to us. At first, he was like mumbling a language I didn't understand, and I was trying to be a hard ass at this point because I didn't know what the hell was going on. And I said, excuse me, and he said, y'all need to get the out of here, and y'all do not need to come back. And we listened to him because he just looked like the pure and tea devil, and it absolutely scared the bejesus out of me. So this was around December of 2016. I'm 22 years old now, and I have not been back to that spot, nor Columbia Manor, nor anywhere near there. So yeah, man, huge fan of your podcast. Keep up the good work. I love that you have this platform where people can just tell all kinds of crazy stuff and not be judged for it. I'm really glad that you actually stepped out and done this, unlike all the other podcasts I've listened to. Got tired of listening to Dateline, so I hopped on here. Appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Thanks, caller. Now allow me to point out from the start that trespassing is never a good idea. Trespassing while armed is only half as smart. It's a terrible idea. Now, all preaching aside, what a terrifying experience. It's one thing to stumble upon a scene like this, thinking whomever is responsible was recently there. That thought's enough to drive one mad. But it's a whole nother situation to then realize that they're still in the vicinity. And I think it's safe to say it becomes a much more dangerous situation, even without the addition of bear traps and suddenly appearing vehicles. And just to save myself a few emails, there are a few black bear in the state of Alabama, although they are limited to the southeast corner of the state. So something tells me whoever set those traps didn't do so for the bears. But I'll leave you all with this final message. I'm certainly no expert on cults or ritualistic ceremony. But if you stumble across sacrificed or mutilated animals, please call the fuzz, even if it's just an anonymous tip. Thanks again, caller, for sharing that entry. It's certainly a heart-stopping series of events. And a big thank you to you for sticking around to the end of the show. Have a good night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome back to the program, everyone. If you're tuning in for the first time, tonight's going to be a little weird. For everyone else that's been listening for a while, you guys are familiar with the grab bag episodes. Well, I always struggle with those. They're just not what I wanted them to be. They don't have the flair that I'd hoped. So over the past couple years, I've been thinking of ways to spice them up. Because sometimes I fall behind and a grab bag is there to save me. And this week is just such a week. Now, Sarah and I had just returned from our trip in the Eastern Sierras. We spent 3 nights just outside of Bishop, near Lake Sabrina. It's beautiful up there. Certainly Sasquatch country. But what it did do was make me late for this week's episode. So on my long drive back, I came up with a plan. Now, this isn't an original plan, it's just a new plan for the show. So this morning, I had Sarah post on Instagram, asking for suggestions on what subject you would like to hear. So tonight, I'm going to go through one by one each of these comments and see what I can do. So without further delay, our first comment this evening comes to us from Band in Alston. I think that's how it's pronounced. Anyway, he or she or they say more ghost stuff in general, but doppelgangers / things that mimic voices especially freak me out. Well, Band in Alston, I got something that might work out. Please welcome Bubba from the state of New York to the program.
Hey Derek, my name's Brandon, but everybody calls me Bubba. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I got a little ghost story from a couple years ago. I was dog sitting for my grandfather. Him and my family went to visit my aunt in Ohio. And so I was sleeping in the back room with the dog. Now the back room and the kitchen are connected by a half wall that has just an old tablecloth hung up. So when the kids are playing in the back room and the parents are cooking, it's a little protected in case, we got a little rowdy and we're throwing stuff. It didn't end up in the food. So I was sleeping on the couch that's against this half wall, and the dog, his name's Buddy, was sleeping on the floor right by me. And I woke up in the middle of the night to him just growling. Now, he's kind of a weird dog. He'd growl at anybody or anything besides myself, my grandfather, and a couple other people. So I didn't think much of it. Told him to, calm down, be quiet, which he did. And as soon as he stopped, I heard just clear as day work boots on the tile floor in the kitchen. Now, first thing that I thought was, oh, okay, my uncle couldn't sleep, so he came up to do paperwork. My uncle and my grandfather have their own construction business, and they use my grandfather's house as kind of like an office. So I called my uncle's name, and there was no answer, but the footsteps just stopped, and the dog just goes absolutely berserk, just barking, growling. So now I'm thinking, oh, somebody broke in, and so I grabbed the shotgun that I brought with me because there were reports of break-ins in the area, and I just started walking through the house. Checked every room, upstairs, downstairs, in the basement. No sign of anybody in the house, no broken glass. The door was still locked. And my grandfather's got this long driveway. So I opened the door and looked out with a flashlight, and there was a fresh coat of snow on the ground. There was no tire tracks, no footprints. So I kind of just, brushed it off, went back to bed. And I guess I never told anybody about it, because a couple months later, I kind of just brought it up in conversation with my mother. And she goes, oh, you never told me about this. I'm like, oh, no, sure I did. I definitely told you. And she said, she goes, no, because I would have told you what happened to my aunt. So the last couple times my aunt has stayed at my grandfather's house, she has slept on the couch in the other living room. And she's woken up in the middle of the night to a man standing at the end of the couch looking into the dining room. She was saying it was a middle-aged guy with a suit and a black top hat on, saying she didn't feel scared or anything, and he was just kind of there. So, I don't know. Don't really know what to make of it. I slept there multiple times after that, and nothing's ever happened. So, I don't know. We'll chalk it up to just one of those things. But they were clear as day footsteps. I thought, my uncle was up there doing paperwork, but I don't know. Nothing was there. All right. I figured I'd share it. Have a good day.
Thanks, Bubba. I've been in those shoes. I remember, and I know I've told this story before, but I was house sitting for my grandparents. They went to, I believe, Hawaii. Well, we all knew the place had some sort of energy to it, especially the back end of the house, which I believe I also mentioned that it was once a candy store that was in town. My grandfather and a few of my uncles, and I believe my dad, he might have been really young at the time, but they tore down the candy store because they were putting a new state route exactly through where it stood. And my grandfather, being the resourceful man that he was, he salvaged all the wood and built the back half of his house with it. So anyway, long story short, we always felt something came with that lumber. My grandmother called him Charlie. But when I was there, alone, house sitting, he scared the hell out of me. So I feel you, Bubba. I know your pain. And I thank you for calling your story in. Now then, next on this little Instagram post, we have a comment from Risen from Ash, who asks for more Dogman stories. Well, I'll be honest with you, Risen from Ash. Those stories are real hard to come by. Especially good Dogman stories. But it is spooky season after all, so let's see what we can find. Well, Risen from Ash. Seems like it's your lucky night. Because Robin has a story out of West Virginia that I think is probably perfect. Please join me in welcoming her to the program.
Hey Derek, my name is Robin and I am calling you from Florida, but this incident that actually happened in West Virginia. So back in 2008, my husband and I decided to take my then 4-year-old son and my mom on a quick snow skiing trip to Snowshoe, West Virginia, the week between Christmas and New Year's. So, and we decided that we really didn't want to drive all that way. So we decided to fly into Charleston, West Virginia and rent a car and then drive over to Snowshoe. So we landed in Charleston and we loaded up the car and started on our way over to Snowshoe. And by this time on that particular day, it was about 5:30 or 6 p.m. So it started to get pretty dark. And the way over there is pretty much 2-lane highway for the majority of the ride. And obviously it's very windy and hilly and gets more mountainous as you get closer to Snowshoe. So we were only about 30 to 45 minutes into the trip, kind of starting to wind through, and my mom and my son had fallen asleep. They were completely worn out. So my husband was driving and I was riding shotgun. And we get to this one particular hill and we're going up the incline, and at the very top of the hill was kind of a rock cut area where they blast through the rock in order to complete the highway. And I really don't know what those are called, the correct terminology, because we don't have those in Florida. So anyway, rock cut area. So our headlights landed on something on the left-hand edge of this little rock cliff. I'm going to say the cliff was about, on either side, they were probably both about 20 to 25 feet high, not too high. But our headlights landed on this thing, this strange thing, perching on the edge of the cliff. And as we got closer, it looked like a giant dog. It definitely had dog-like features. I mean, we could see it in profile. So it, it had kind of a dog's muzzle and it had pointy ears, but this thing was huge. And by huge, I mean, I'm 5'4", so I'm not tall by any stretch of the imagination, but this thing was in a seated position at the edge of this cliff, and I would guess that it would have been eye to eye with me. So it was pretty big for a seated dog. Also, it was super muscular. I mean, this thing had giant muscles. They were really defined and totally bizarre. And as we got closer and closer to it, probably only about 60 feet away, this thing went from its seated position with no momentum and completely leapt across the entire 2-lane highway, complete with emergency lanes on either side of the regular lanes, and galloped off into the trees on the other side of the road, of the cliff. And it was the most incredible thing we've ever seen. It made absolutely no sense. Sense to us whatsoever. This highway had two standard lanes, then again the smaller emergency lanes on either side, and then this rock cut area was kind of sloped, and so of course it's going to be wider at the top. And so my husband and I are thinking, like, this thing leapt at least 40 feet from a seated position before it galloped off into the, and I say gallop only because it's really the best way to describe its running motion. While it was in the air, I know that sounds crazy, but when it was like right in front of our car and over our car and in the air, you could see the defined muscles even better. And it had this really small waist with muscular hind legs, but the upper body was much bigger and bulkier than the rest of the animal or thing. And it almost looked like it had shoulders. It really looked a lot like a gargoyle, honestly, Very strange. I don't remember the tail. I know it had a tail, but it wasn't all that remarkable. So I don't remember too many details about it, but I do remember there being, a medium-sized tail. But anyway, it was so bizarre. My husband and I looked at each other and simultaneously we said, what the was that? and we still say that, 12 years later. Anyway, after Googling and just kind of like doing a little research, the only thing that he and I can agree on that it looks like is a dogman, which I can't even believe I'm saying that out loud, but it does look like illustrations of a dogman. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen to this date. Hopefully it's the craziest thing I will ever see. We did talk about on the rest of our trip, though, how when we landed in Charleston, West Virginia, that's really only about an hour away from Point Pleasant, where all of the crazy Mothman sightings were and the bridge collapse and everything that happened back in the day. But very strange area. We figured you were probably the perfect person to share this with, that hopefully you could give us some ideas if you know what this could be, or if you've heard of any other stories of anything crazy like this in that area. I'm sure there's lots of strange things in that area, but love the podcast. I think it's awesome. I think I've probably heard every single one. I've been listening since just about the beginning, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. I know it's crazy. And keep up the good work, and can't wait for the next episode. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. I have mad respect for anyone that sat through the first couple episodes of this program. So how about that one, Risen from the Ash? It's a pretty good story. And, believe it or not, it's not the first time I've heard one almost exactly like it. A year or so back, I remember reading about a dogman experience in West Virginia. So I went back and dug it up while I was listening to this one. Now, this information comes from National Cryptid Society, and it details an experience from August 27th of 2017 near the town of Lavalette, West Virginia, which, depending on where Robin had her experience, is only about 100 to 150 miles away. Well, it's an experience by a man named Ronald, who was 20 years old at the time, and was driving through rural parts of West Virginia when he had his experience. Now, he too was in a vehicle, driving along, and he reached a high bank. I'm not sure what those are called either, Robin. We always refer to them as cuts. So this gentleman was driving down the road, and in his headlights he saw something he couldn't quite explain. Now, I've actually pulled out a section of this 12 or 13 minute recording. I want you to hear how similar Ronald's account is to Robin's.
When we both stared at each other, even while I'm inside my car, I heard what sounded like bones popping loudly, and to my absolute shock, I watched this wolf place its hand on top of my car hood, raise itself off the ground, and stand up on two legs. Yeah, you heard me right. It wasn't a paw it placed on my car hood. It was a hand. When the wolf stood up and my headlights hit it square on, that's when I got a really good look at it. It was easily 8 feet tall and weighed approximately 600 to 650 pounds or more. As I said, it was covered in jet black hair that seemed quite feral in my opinion, as if it hadn't been cleaning himself that much. And it had a long bushy tail and two glowing amber yellow eyes. To my shock, it was more than a wolf standing on its hind legs. It had a human-like torso from the waist up, appeared pretty muscular with broad shoulders and long forearms, longer than those of a normal human being. I could see the muscles from this quote-unquote wolfman pulsating with each breath it took, especially in the headlights. It also had these dexterous hands that looked almost like raccoon hands, but with more elongated fingers and long jet black claws at each fingertip. They looked like they could be used to easily manipulate any kind of prey in its clutches, and they looked like they could easily rip me to shreds, or maybe they could do more than just that.
Now, eventually, Ronald broke out of his trance and drove away. And you can hear the entire story by visiting tonight's show notes. Or you can go over to the National Cryptid Society and search for it yourself. It's wild stuff, Robin. We truly appreciate you taking the time to share the story with us. Having grown up not all that far from that area, I find this story fascinating. Now, folks, if you have a story you would like to hear on the show, give our hotline a call at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. All right. Well, our next commenter is Allie Gilstrap, and she suggested aliens and mirrored men. Well, Allie, I would love to play you a handful of mirrored men stories, but that well seems to have been dry as of lately. So maybe you out there listening have a mirrored men experience or have heard one. If you're that person, maybe give the show a call. But as far as aliens are concerned, I think I might have something that would pique your interest. The following was submitted anonymously from my home state of Ohio.
Hi, Derek. So this story comes from Ohio, around the Dayton area, between Dayton and Cincy, closer to Dayton. So these happened about a year ago, and these aren't my experiences. I'm telling this on behalf of two of my closest friends, but these happened about two weeks apart, completely unrelated to each other. At the time, these two girls were not friends with each other. They didn't know each other too well, just like mutual through me. And, you know, it's weird because these girls have the same first name, and both of their parents, both mom and dad, have the same name. So that's kind of weird. And I gotta say, neither of these girls are the type to make up a story like this, let alone even believe in this type of stuff, given that it hadn't happened to them. First of all, we live pretty close to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which has all types of conspiracies around it regarding how it may hold remains from the Roswell crash. So we live just 20-30 minutes south of the Air Force Base, and the first instance happened to one of these girls when she was driving home one night on the state route that runs through our town, which is State Route 73. And it was a dark but clear summer night, and as she's driving home, she looks up and sees some sort of aircraft in the sky with super bright lights, almost like spotlights. And she immediately is overcome with the instinct that this is something otherworldly, and she pulls out her phone and starts taking pictures. Anyone with an iPhone nowadays pretty much knows when the picture's taken, the screen flashes and the little thumbnail comes up at the bottom of the screen. And if you have the flash on, it'll flash. And so she said she took about 5 or 6 pictures just to make sure she got a good shot. And then just a few minutes later, when she got home, she went to pull up the pictures, and they weren't there. There was no pictures. So she was kind of freaked out. I thought that was kind of crazy. And so a week or so later, my other friend, she was driving to Dayton to go to class. This was like the afternoon, broad daylight, clear day. And as she was on the highway approaching the city, she notices like a large silver flying saucer, like with a dome on the top, like the generic UFO image, I don't know. And she said that she just saw it hover there for a second, and just within like seconds, not even like faster than the speed of light, this thing just zooms off into the horizon, disappears. And, you know, she was in traffic, not like heavy traffic, but she kind of looked around to see if anybody else like noticed this or slowed down or anything. And no, nobody seemed fazed but her. But that's it for the actual experiences. But oddly enough, both of my friends that were in these situations have been dealing with all types of weird health issues that aren't able to be solved by any doctors or specialists ever since this happened. So I don't know, I thought I'd share my story with you. Thanks for the podcast. We love it. Keep up the good work, and can't wait to hear next week's podcast. See ya.
Thank you, caller. You know, not only were the supposed alien beings from the Roswell crash taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but I recently learned that the craft that supposedly crashed in Kecksburg in the 1960s was also eventually taken to Wright-Patterson. Seems like there's an awful lot of activity going around that little base. Well, anyway, speaking of UFOs, on my way home from this recent camping trip just yesterday, we were driving down 395, a little south of Lone Pine, and we were going pretty slow because we're towing a trailer and I was kind of zoning out. And in the valley to the left of me, I would say probably 1,000 yards away, I could see a craft hovering about 100 feet off the ground. Well, I don't know if it was hovering exactly, but it was above the ground. Now this craft, at first I thought was a drone of some sort, because it sort of had that structural look to it. But this craft had no lights whatsoever. And if it were a drone, it would have been massive. At the same distance, the telephone poles were about 1 inch to 1 inch tall in my view. And this craft, this hovering craft, was at least 1 inch wide. And the strangest detail about this craft was that it seemed to be a singular brown color. Possibly a brushed copper color. It was really hard to determine, but the sun would glisten off the top. Now I watched it the best I could for somebody driving down the highway, and I tried to point it out to Sarah, but she couldn't find it. Now I thought for sure this was an eagle or something like that, but then I saw other birds flying around it that were so tiny in comparison. And possibly one of the strangest things about this little experience was on the other side of the highway, 2 gentlemen were pulled off to the side of the road, and they had tripods and binoculars and cameras pointed in that direction. So if by chance those 2 gentlemen happened to be listening, please tell me what I saw. Thanks again, caller, for sharing your entry. Well, guys, I have some excellent news for you. I know a lot of you are out there waiting for these brand new Halloween shirts to be reordered, and the good news is, they are here. So please jump on over to monstersamonguspodcast.com and click on the shop tab and pick yours up today. Now, I can't tell you for sure if we'll order these again, so if you want one, I suggest you act quickly. Tonight's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Does it seem like there's a block between you and your happiness? Do you struggle daily, but are unsure where to turn? Well, BetterHelp can and will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can connect in a convenient, safe, online environment and start communicating in under 48 hours. With BetterHelp, you have the option to schedule weekly video or phone sessions, or message your counselor pretty much anytime. Now rest easy knowing anything you share is completely confidential. Now BetterHelp's counselors specialize in depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, family conflicts, and a whole lot more. And the service is available worldwide, so it doesn't matter where you're listening from. And you know, this whole thing's at a more affordable price than the traditional offline counseling. and financial aid is also available if you need it. Now, I want you to start living a happier life. I want you to conquer those blocks. And as a Monsters Among Us listener, you get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/Monsters Among Us. Allow BetterHelp to offer you that lifeline. Join over 1 million people who have already taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Monsters Among Us. Now, as always, supporting our sponsors supports the show. So thanks for listening. Now, our next comment on this inspirational post comes to us from 12B.G.26, and they're requesting Black-Eyed Children. Well, I can tell you, I've been sitting on a particular call waiting for a really good time to play it. And it's not about Black-Eyed Children, but I think it's close enough that 12BG26 just might enjoy this. So please, welcome from the state of Oklahoma, Dylan.
Hi, Derek. It's Dylan from Oklahoma. I've called a few times before, and I'm also the guy that posted on the group page asking for Black-Eyed Kid stories for a documentary. I'm not here to promote that, but I actually kind of came across something in my research today that I thought, you might want to share on the show. This isn't a personal encounter or anything, but I just thought it was really cool and maybe good for a Monsters Among Us episode. It was in one of the books that I recently ordered. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's short and mostly white and some red on it. I apologize if I was at my grad office. I could give you the exact title, but I'm at home right now. Anyway, the thing that I found was the possibility of the existence of something called white-eyed kids. Now, I'm personally not 100% convinced on that. According to that book, as well as some digging around on the internet, it's a pretty recent phenomena, but I mean, so are the mirrored men. So if the mirrored men exist as I believe they do, so could these. So what I found out is that white-eyed kids differ from black-eyed children in a couple key ways. For one, obviously, is they have solid white eyes as opposed to solid black eyes. Their alleged hypnotic powers are a lot more powerful. From the story that I'm going to share that I read online, I'm not too sure I'm convinced about that one either, but yeah, their hypnotic powers are supposed to be more powerful. Sometimes even can have white hair, usually blonde hair. But the most interesting part is the possibility of missing time, which I haven't really seen a whole lot, at least in the Black-Eyed Kid stories that I've read. I've read a lot of them. I just haven't seen those in the ones that I've read. But in the story I found online about white-eyed kids, there was this veteran. He was stopping off at a gas station, I think, or he was stopping off at a restaurant to get something to eat. I don't. It was something like that. And this kid knocks on his window. So it's starting out a lot like a Black-Eyed Kid encounter. This kid knocks on his window. He says, "Hey, mister, can you roll down your window for me?" He rolls down his window, and white-eyed kid says, "Hey, can you take me home? Can you let me inside and take me home?" And once again, it's at this point that he finally notices the eyes. Now, this is another key difference I noticed, is that while the alleged witness was put off by the eyes, really super creeped out by the eyes, because again, they were solid white as opposed to solid black. And the witness did clarify that it wasn't like a milky white, like someone who's blind. It was like pure solid white. So it was as though the entire eye was the sclera, as opposed to the entire eye being like the iris, being solid black. He didn't mention that he felt a sense of malevolence coming from this thing. He was just creeped out by it. So eventually it ends as you'd expect it to. He drives off, but he doesn't really remember driving off. Next thing he knew, he was on the road heading home, and this sudden downpour of rain occurred. He looks at the clock and it's 7 p.m. Well, when he pulled into the gas station, it was 4:45 p.m. So he lost time during the encounter with this thing. The next day at work, he then finds 2 handprints, like child-sized handprints, on the window on his car of the side where the kid was. So it's kind of interesting. I'm not convinced 100% of these things are real. I'm a believer in black-eyed kids, but my worry is that this could be like a creepypasta or something that spawned from the idea of black-eyed children. I don't know. But, I mean, if any of your listeners have seen a white-eyed kid, I mean, they should call that into the show, because if these things are real, they're a lot more rarer than black-eyed kid encounters, and black-eyed kid encounters are already super rare. Yeah, I just think it would be cool to hear more of these encounters if they indeed are a thing right now. I will say one other key difference there possibly could be, just based on my research of black-eyed kids, is that their motives are probably a little different. I am of the belief that black-eyed kids, like their hypnotic effect, isn't necessarily trying to put the idea into your head to let them inside. It's more so the fear aspect, because they might feed off of the energy produced by fear. You know, that fight or flight response produces a lot of energy, and then when you come down from that, you feel really tired, really drained, and a lot of black-eyed kid witnesses who let them inside report feeling drained of energy for a long time, and getting that energy sucked from you because of fear could maybe exacerbate that effect. I don't know. But in the white-eyed kid encounter, you don't have that fear aspect as pronounced. The witness did not report feeling that the entity was malevolent. He felt creeped out by the eyes, and, you know, I would be creeped out by that too if I didn't know what I was looking at. So maybe there are reasons for why they want you to give them permission to enter into whatever place they're trying to enter into is completely different. Again, that would require more witness testimony. But yeah. Anyway, I hope you could use this. I apologize, it's not exactly in the right kind of format, but love the show a lot. Yeah. Hope you have a good week. Bye.
Thank you, Dylan. We always love learning new things here. And that's exactly what the white-eyed children are. They're new to me. But throughout this description, I couldn't help but think of The Village of the Damned. There's 2 different versions of the film. Christopher Reeve, I believe, is in one of them. Anyway, the town's children turn into these white-haired, white-eyed zombies. And they look almost exactly like what Dylan's describing. Well, I did a little searching on this new phenomena, and I found this entry in villainsfandom.com, and they have it categorized as a urban legend. Much like black-eyed children encounters, the white-eyed children are known to knock on doors or windows. However, unlike black-eyed children who travel in groups, primarily duos, the white-eyed children are reportedly seclusive and rarely appear in groups when interacting with their victims. They are also typically sighted in isolated areas such as the woods or campgrounds. Also, unlike their relatives, they don't need permission to get inside a victim's house. Instead, they'd suddenly appear inside, where they then motionlessly stare at the witness without an iota of emotion. Also, unlike the black-eyed children, white-eyed children are powerful telepaths using mind control to communicate. It goes on to describe a few other attributes. Well, just when you thought it was safe to go into the woods, there's a new monster out there. You know, one thing that's always troubled me with the black-eyed children, and I suppose these new white-eyed children, why wouldn't they just wear a pair of sunglasses? Then they're just strange children in sunglasses. Of course you'd let them in. Right. Thanks again, Dylan, for sharing the entry. Now guys, I'll just squeeze this in here. Go support me on Patreon if you can. We truly appreciate it. There's a lot of great content over there. Patreon.com/Monsters Among Us podcast. Well, now next up on our little list of suggestions is Frank, and he says, definitely more ghosts, more law enforcement stories too. Well, Frank, let me see what I can find.
Hey Derek, this is Anthony. I live in Westminster, Maryland. It's November 21st, 2020. This has been a rough year so far. I'm in the car right now, cleaning out my car, making some more space, and I was listening to the podcast, and I got reminded about something that I had ran into a couple months back. This was before COVID. Man, time really flies. She was going down some back roads, and she ran into a bunch of what looked like police cars, SWAT team, at 3 in the morning looking for something, maybe an escaped alien or something, and it triggered something in my mind that I really just let go because I thought it was nothing. I was on my way back from rehearsal. Before COVID, I used to dance in this dinner theater show. It wasn't really huge. We used to have like 300 audience members at a time, one show a year. It wasn't huge. I'm not a movie star or anything like that, but it was something enjoyable to do. God, I really miss it. I love dancing and stuff. But anyway, I was coming down these back roads at 11 p.m. on my way home from rehearsal, and I was going through this place called Harney, Maryland. It's right there by the PA line. If you go far enough down Harney Road, you will hit Littlestown, PA. And that's the route I was taking. I was going down Harney Road coming from Hagerstown, Maryland. I had just passed through Emmitsburg, and I was coming down Harney Road, and I came to a similar situation. It was a bunch of cop cars all over the place. Some of them looked like federal agents. They were like all blacked out cars with lights on the inside, and they were all over the place. It was probably about 11 or 12 of them, and I couldn't see what was going on, but I asked if I could proceed through if there was like some sort of blockage, and he kind of just like waved me on through and ignored what I said, and he was like still looking around as he was waving me on through to pass through to continue on Harney Road. Right at that intersection, there's a bunch of houses and businesses. Is a Harney Shop Road there, but nothing ever came up in the news. And that one thing that was mentioned about nothing ever coming up in the news really like triggered my mind to come and call you guys and talk about it. Maybe it was something, because who knows? It's a very secluded area back there, open space, farmland, just on the other side of Carroll County, so anything could be going on. But yeah, nothing happened in the news, so it was a little strange. But yeah, you have a great podcast, and I appreciate you for giving us this platform to talk about the things we see. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Anthony. It really makes you wonder what was going on out there. You know, it could have been some sort of fugitive, possibly a raid. I remember when I lived in Los Angeles, my roommate and friend from college, he bought a house in mid-city. It was right along the I-10 freeway. Could literally hit it with a baseball. And in the middle of the night, in our first, I'd say 3 weeks, I felt something I'd never felt before in my entire life. I was dead asleep, and I was startled awake by my entire body reverberating. Now, I'm an extremely light sleeper, so I feel I experienced a majority of what took place. Well, I jumped awake and met my roommates out in the living room. And that's when we realized the house across the street, literally across the street, was being raided by the Los Angeles Police Department. And the intense vibration that I felt was a percussion grenade about 100 feet away. Now, like Anthony, I have no idea what the police were doing there, because everyone that lived in the home was back there the next day. But I'll never forget the feeling I felt that night. It was quite odd. And as for Anthony's entry, who knows what it was? Like I said, it could have been a fugitive. Could have been an accident. Could have been a raid. Or it could have been an escaped creature. Why not? Thanks again, Anthony, for sharing the entry. Tonight's episode is also brought to you by Simply Safe. There's big news from my favorite home security company. Simply Safe just launched their new wireless outdoor security camera. That's right, Simply Safe, the system that U.S. News & World Report names Best Home Security System of 2021. And it just got even better. This brand new outdoor security camera is engineered with all the advanced tech and security features you want and need to keep you and your family safe. This security camera has an ultra-wide 140-degree field of view, perfect for keeping watch over your entire yard. It also has 1080p HD resolution with an 8x zoom, so you'll be able to see things like faces, license plates, and of course Sasquatch, clearly to capture critical evidence. The setup is quick and easy, and it has a built-in spotlight and color night vision, so you'll be able to keep an eye on whatever's going on, day or night. You never know. You might be able to catch something spooky on that camera. To learn more about the new Simply Safe wireless outdoor security camera, visit simplysafe.com/Monsters Among Us. And what's more, Simply Safe is celebrating this new camera by offering 20% off your entire system and your first month of monitoring service free when you enroll in interactive monitoring. Again, that's simplysafe.com/Monsters Among Us. And as always, supporting our sponsors helps support the show. So thanks for listening. Back to the spooky stuff. Now bringing up the old telephone here. The next commenter is Skinwalkerism, and they say more ABCs/Phantom Big Cats and Dogman. Well, Skinwalkerism, we already covered the Dogman, so I bet you I could find an ABC call. In fact, the following is Zach's entry from the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, my name's Zach, and I'm calling from Nashville, Tennessee. This is the first time I've ever listened to your podcast was tonight, and it's interesting that I have a reason to call in. It's referring to the 911 dispatch operator out of Chattanooga from Season 9, Episode 1 of the First Responders, and the Panther in the Road. I was a truck driver for about 7 years back a long time ago now, about 15, 16 years ago, something like that. I lived in Tennessee, so I went through Chattanooga a lot. And one night I was at a truck stop outside Chattanooga, and every once in a while I'd turn on the CB just to hear drivers talking back and forth. And I heard these drivers talking about the craziest thing they'd ever seen. One driver said he pulled into a truck stop late one night and went in, cab first, which usually he doesn't do. And he heard a rustling outside his truck, and it was coming from the front. So he jumped into the front seat and turned the lights on, and when he did that, he saw a black panther licking the bugs out of the grill of his truck in the truck stop parking lot somewhat. It had come because the parking lot butted up to some trees. So that's the entire story. I don't have anything else to go with it. I just thought it was pretty interesting that the first night I listened to it, I hear a story that relates to another story that I had firsthand heard, that I heard from the person's mouth about a Black Panther in the Chattanooga area. Thank you very much. Your podcast is pretty cool. 5.
Thank you, Zach. Well, this episode has certainly shown me that I need to circle back to some of these special episodes. Law enforcement, truckers, and I saw a few people suggesting things here on this comment thread. The service industry, that's a pretty good idea. More trucker stories, we just got one of those. Hiker, camper stories, which I also think is a pretty good idea. And there's a few others in here. So let's go ahead and name our next special while we're at it. And although I am not religious in practically any way, I am fascinated by the stories and lore. And believe it or not, I have several friends that are pastors or preachers or whatever the denomination. And they've all told me strange stories. None that I think were quite qualified to be on this program, but odd stories nonetheless. So I think our next special episode will be stories from the clergy. Or maybe there's a better terminology, but if you're a pastor, preacher, priest, nun, whatever, if you work in religion and you have a wild story to share, give us a call to hotline 1-888-608-NIGHT. And when you do, be sure to use the word clergy early on, because that'll be the search word that I go with. Now, folks, before we hit up this final call of the evening, I have some good news to announce. This past weekend, the 2021 Paranormal Podcast Awards, presented by Paranormality Media, were held. And wouldn't you know, we took home the gold yet again. This time for the 2021 Paranormal Podcast Award for Best Paranormal Podcast. I'll tell you what, if this keeps happening, I'm gonna have to build a shelf. A huge, huge thanks to everyone that took the time to vote, everyone that takes the time to listen and contribute, and of course, donate and support our sponsors. And obviously a gigantic thanks to Paranormality, Jack, Sam, everybody over there. Thank you guys so much. And finally, that brings us to our final entry of the evening. And this one was requested a few different times, but originally, Little Cries mentioned it. Sean over at Campbell Coachworks mentioned it, in a way. But the first person to recommend it was Chrisabel, writing, Bigfoot, my favorite. Well, Chrisabel, tonight is also your lucky night, because this Sasquatch story that I have queued up for you, that gave me the creeps. So without further hesitation, bring your little ones close. The following is Mark's entry from Parts Unknown.
Hello, Derek. My name is Mark. Huge fan of your podcast. My story comes out of Colorado. When I was younger, it was about 20 years ago, so the early 2000s, I had a family. I had an uncle and his wife and kids that lived up in the mountains, pretty deep into the Rockies. Well, my dad went to go visit his brother, my uncle, and took us along. Well, I have two older brothers and an older cousin. The two older brothers decided to go out and explore the woods with my older cousin, and I, of course, begged to go along. Well, I'm about 5 years younger than my older brother and 6 than the oldest brother. So I was always that younger brother that was pleading to go along, be as cool as my older brothers. Anyways, we get up to the mountains, we're exploring, and at every chance they get, they keep trying to ditch me and twist and turns. But anyways, it was about 9, 10 o'clock at night. You know, our parents are sitting around enjoying themselves while we're out exploring. We had been gone for about 30 to 45 minutes, just walking not too far away from the house, when they decide, hey, do you want to see this cool spot? I decided I wanted to go with. Of course, yeah. Well, we go, and they keep mumbling and whispering to each other, and I thought that they were talking about the monsters or, strange things they had seen. Well, all of a sudden, I hear them just take off running. And I try to keep up, but I have no idea where they went. So, like I said, it's about 10 o'clock at night. I'm fruitlessly looking around, can't find them. So I just stay put. That's the first thing I've always learned. If you're lost, stay put and just holler. So I stay put, and it's, 20, 30 minutes goes by, and I'm starting to get really freaked out. So I start crying, start screaming, and after about another 5 minutes of, just crying and nobody answering, I hear the branch snap. And I'm thinking, oh, they come, and I could hear them. So I get up and I tiptoe. And as soon as I come around the bend, it was a little bit of a hill, clear night as well. I come around the base of this tree, big tree, and I swear to you, I came face to face with something that I've never seen before. It was tall. Everyone in my family is above at least 6'4", so this thing was 7, 8 feet tall. I come around the corner, I come around that tree, and we had both just scared each other. I'd surprised him, and I wasn't expecting something so tall, so I immediately just sat down on the ground in shock. This thing looked, the only way I can describe it is the closest way is Harry and the Hendersons. Big, long face, hair everywhere, but eyes big as dinner plates because I had scared him. Anyways, I sat down and all of a sudden he took off. He just turned around on his heel and just took off into the brush, crashing, and I could hear him running. And after another 5 to 10 minutes of sitting there just keeping my eyes closed, I could hear my uncle and my dad and my family calling for me. So I raised the alarm, I'm here. And when I got back to the house, I had said something, I had seen something, but nobody believed me. Everyone's just, oh, it's your mind playing tricks on you, you're hearing stuff. So I never told anybody in my family, and I've never had the guts to tell anybody until now. I hope you can use this. Like I said, it scared me something fierce. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for working up the courage to share that story. And that's a traumatizing story, even without the Sasquatch experience. And it's also a story that sounds vaguely familiar. A few short years ago, there was a missing child story that I remember hearing about. It sounded oddly similar to what Mark had experienced. The disappearance of Casey Hathaway.
In North Carolina tonight, there is an urgent search for a 3-year-old boy, Casey Hathaway. He went out to play with 2 other children and then disappeared from his grandmother's yard. Here's ABC's Steve Osunsami now.
Volunteers from the U.S. Marines are helping authorities in eastern North Carolina tonight searching the thick woods for 3-year-old Casey Hathaway. The FBI is here, and more than 400 neighbors are also helping in the search, but so far, no sign of the boy.
Our number one priority right now is finding Casey.
The 3-year-old went missing Tuesday afternoon from his grandmother's home in rural Craven County, where he was playing in the backyard with 2 related children. By the time the other kids came inside, the boy had disappeared. It was freezing cold Tuesday night, and authorities are hoping the boy found shelter, but they're also searching nearby waters.
That story courtesy of ABC World News Tonight. Maybe you spot the coincidences. A young boy, lost in the woods, abandoned by 2 other children. And like Mark's story, Casey's too has a happy ending. Casey was found. But also, just like in Mark's experience, there's a wrinkle to the story.
Little Casey spent 2 nights in the woods battling freezing temperatures and heavy rain. Rescuers had to wade through waist-deep water just to get to the 3-year-old. He was discovered tangled up in a thorn bush like this one, soaking wet, cold, and crying for his mother. Then came the surprising turn in this story. Casey's aunt revealed on Facebook that Casey said he hung out with a bear for 2 days. Miracles do happen.
He said that he was in the woods, and I asked, like, who were you with? And he said, a bear.
Was it really possible? Did a wild black bear befriend Casey and keep the youngsters safe? I went with wildlife expert Chris Lasher from the North Carolina Zoo to investigate.
This territory where little Casey was found is perfect bear territory. They would definitely live in this area. So it's definitely possible.
One theory out there is that the bear mistook Casey for a cub. Is that even possible?
Bears are very nurturing animals, but they take care of their own. I'm not sure that a bear would see a young child in distress as a possible something that they have to take care of.
Casey's story has charmed everyone. Well-wishers have sent him dozens of stuffed bears. As for his mom, she knows not everyone believes a bear kept her son safe, but she does.
If he said he was with a bear, he was with a bear.
And that clip is courtesy of Inside Edition. Now, it's certainly an interesting detail in this extraordinary story. And like with Mark's story, at the end of the day, you have to sit back and decide which of the following is more likely. That a 3-year-old boy managed to survive as long as he did in the freezing temperatures and the downpour of rain. Or that a friendly black bear adopted him temporarily, keeping him alive until rescuers could find him. Or that little Casey mistaken a bear for something else. Well, I'd always thought that story to be fascinating. I'm glad I finally found an opportunity to share it. So thank you again, Mark, for sharing your entry. That's one of the better Bigfoot stories I've heard in a while. And I also want to thank everyone that commented on the Instagram post. I realize I did not get to nearly enough of you, but this was a lot of fun. This was a challenge for me that I enjoyed, and I could see myself doing this again in the future. So if I didn't get to you this time, be sure to comment next time and I'll see what I can do. And on that note, that's going to do it for this Grab Bag episode. So Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Addie Lloyd. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Keep the party rolling by joining us on social media. As you can see, sometimes we drop little surprises. We have accounts at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have a few short moments, please jump over to Apple iTunes or whatever they're calling it these days, and leave the show a 5-star rating and a nice little review. Certainly appreciate it. And lastly, the terrifying score you heard this evening was provided by Co.ag Music, Carl Casey, and White Bat Audio. Thank you so much for listening. And until next week.